All right. All right. Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to the GSA Acquisition Policy Federal Advisory Committee FAC Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting. I am Stephanie Hardison. I am the Deputy Designated Federal Officer. And before we get started, today's event is being recorded and will be posted to our website with all relevant meeting material. There will be a time for any relevant comments or statements towards the end for our public attendees. And we will now open the meeting for the Policy and Practice Subcommittee meeting by taking roll. All right, we'll start with Luke.
Here.
Richard.
Here.
Leslie. Antonio Doss. Mr. Mark Hayden.
Yes.
Dr. Amlan. Is Amlan here? Jenny Romer. We know Steve is out, Steve Schooner. Stacy Smedley. Nigel Stevens. Anish.
Here.
David.
Present.
And Kimberly.
Present.
All right. And with us today also, Mr. Reader, we would also like to introduce our actual committee chair and co-chair, Ms. Troy Cribb and Cassius Butts are with us today as well. All right, with that, I will now turn it over to Luke.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you folks. Good afternoon, members of the public who are here with us today. Very excited to hear from Mr. John Reader first and foremost from the Environmental Working Group. He's Vice President of Federal Affairs. He's going to be talking to us about PFAS, and I believe he's going to weave in something about the new rule that was just proposed. We are then going to follow that up with what I hope to be some report outs from the PFAS task group and the Tech Tools task group. And then we're going to go to administrative business, which is really an open discussion about issues, any feedback, anything that we need to discuss moving forward. And then we'll go to public comments and closing remarks. Before we let Mr. Reader begin with his presentation, I just wanted to ask if either Troy or Cassius had anything they wanted to say, in particular in light of the new rule that was proposed also.
And myself again, thanks. Just at this point, thank you all. I really look forward to the discussion, and as we're kind of embarking on our second stage of forming additional recommendations. So I think we should just proceed with the discussion, and then I might have more comments at the end.
Terrific. Thank you, Troy. John, I think the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Again, my name is John Reader with the Environmental Working Group. I have a little bit of a sniffle, but thankfully we're on Zoom. You should all be safe no matter what it is. It's really a pleasure to have a chance to meet with you all, and some of you I've maybe seen before. I certainly know Steve Coy. Nice to see you, Steve, who's been really supportive of sustainable procurement in the government. So thank you for that. I was in EPA for a long time. I was at EPA for over 30 years, and I just want to thank you all for your service on the Federal Advisory Committee. I know it's not a high-paying job, and it takes a lot of your time, but over the years, I really found the advisory committees to be so critical, so vital for the government, because we do get in a little bit of a bubble in the government, and hearing from people who are in the real world, as I call it, the real world outside of the beltway of Washington, it's really valuable for government officials. So thank you for your service on the advisory committee. I'm working for an environmental group now, and when I took this job, it wasn't obvious to me that I'd somehow end up back in the world of government procurement, because that's something that I felt happy to leave behind. I wasn't really in the procurement arena as part of my job, other than approving purchases and, budgets and that type of thing as a senior official at EPA, but understanding the actual ins and outs of procurement was something that people told me, answers to questions to, but I didn't really understand deeply. So, but there is such a connection here between government procurement and environmental aims, and that's your focus, sustainability, and how to move the federal government towards sustainability. And it's not a new idea. The government's had various initiatives over the years to move towards sustainability, and it's been a really difficult trick to move this large enterprise, $650 billion in purchases every year, into a sustainability framework. So, your work is, I think, incredibly important, because a customer that size really moves the markets. It really sends a different kind of signal to the markets. And that's how EWG got involved in this, was, this is an opportunity to really do something. And the Biden administration has made it a priority. So it's a double opportunity to really get something done for the environment through government procurement. So I'll stop with that prologue and move on to the presentation. I do want to say that I'm kind of dropping into the middle of your process. So, if things are not computing or I'm not really making sense for what you're trying to do, I hope you'll stop me, ask some questions, and help me get oriented to what would be most helpful for you in developing your recommendations. So
sure, thanks, John. And if you want, I can shepherd questions in the chat, or if folks raise their hands, I'm happy to do that too, if that's okay with you.
Oh, that'd be great, because
Great.
I'll be kind of multitasking and I have a one-track mind. So
Great.
if you just break in and let me know that there's something to address in the chat, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to try to share my screen. And if that doesn't work, we have a backup plan.
Nothing yet. Have you tried? Oh, there we go. I'm good. We can
Is
see
it
your
up?
desktop. We can see your desktop. So if you want to expand the slides.
I don't know how to do that. Well, I think I do, but hold on. Is it just slides now, or are you seeing everything?
No, everything.
Yeah, you hit view, maybe?
I'm sorry, it's been some time.
Slideshow, maybe?
Yeah, slideshow or view. Just right where you were, slideshow.
I'd like to go to view, I think, so I get them
Okay.
all, but we'll see. It might just give me slideshow.
Yep.
Now?
Oh, we
Yeah.
still see them all, if that's what you want us to see.
Oh, yeah, you can see all the slides on the left. That's fine, as long as
Okay.
it's not too cluttered up.
Okay.
Can everybody see can they read this well enough to keep going?
I can.
Okay.
Hey, John, would it be easier if I share my screen and you just tell me when to proceed?
Happy to do that too. Oh, this is fine. If
Okay.
it's not too distracting for you all, if it's not too distracting and it's large enough, I'm good with this. Okay. So PFAS free procurement, getting it done. So one of the principal aims I have today is to convince you all that PFAS is a little bit different than a lot of other sustainability objectives. In some ways, it's more difficult. And in some other ways, I think it's a real opportunity for some easy, really meaningful, really impactful changes in procurement that will really make a difference. And I think greatly appreciated, at least across the environmental community and environmental justice community. So I thought it would be good to start with a little bit of background about what is PFAS. Most of you probably aren't that deep into environmental issues, but PFAS is a chemical that's been around for several. It's a class of chemicals, thousands of chemicals that have been in commerce for decades. It's a 3M and DuPont invention from many years ago. And it's spun off from there with different variations, and it's an extremely commercially valuable product. It's been used for stain resistance, water resistance, heat resistance, frictionless bearings. The applications are just, it's been used in paints, floor levelers, all kinds of industrial and household uses. And so I put in here hundreds of common products such as cookware, carpets, cleaners, paints. It's in a lot of products that you use every day, frankly. And now, somehow, we call this now an emerging contaminant in the regulatory arena at EPA, but it's not really emerging. It's been around a long time. But the entire regulatory system of the United States government has somehow failed to address PFAS in any meaningful way to keep it out of products, including containers that hold food, and containers that people and products that people bring into their homes all the time. And it's now found in the blood of nearly all Americans. And by nearly all, I mean over 99%. It's almost ubiquitous, at least in the United States and probably around the world in terms of some level of exposure. That doesn't mean everybody's going to die from PFAS, but it's just a sign of how ubiquitous it really is. And it's been found in the drinking water of over 200 million Americans and in over 2,000 communities. The European Union is just now considering a restriction proposal, and the last line there is that is a direct quote, that human biomonitors show omnipresence of PFAS in humans. EWG has also done studies showing that it's very widespread in fish, and we have hundreds of studies showing that it's also showing up in wildlife. It's shown up in dairy cattle. Some farmers have had to euthanize entire herds of dairy cattle because of PFAS that was in the water and made it into the cattle and the milk from the cows. So we're looking at a very significant problem that's still, although starting to get some press attention, is still sort of, I think we're a long way from seeing the full horrible effects that we're going to see from PFAS if we don't start addressing it very aggressively. I put on this slide some of the health effects, and you can go to EPA's, you'll see a little link at the bottom. By the way, I'll share this slideshow with everybody because there are lots of links in there, Luke, that people might want to look at later. So I put them all in here, and at your leisure, you can look at the links. This material is lifted directly from EPA's website about what do we know about PFAS health effects, and they obviously go into a lot more detail on all of these effects, but it's wide ranging and at very low levels. And I would add, even though I work for an environmental group now, there's not much controversy about the science of the health effects. Industry has pushed back on some regulatory proposals, not because they don't believe the science or they think the science is questionable, shaky. That's mostly around costs, who should pay, what are we going to do? Let's look at the benefits of these chemicals in commerce and not forget to consider that. But very few organizations, even in industry, are pushing back on the science and the health effects information that EPA, CDC, and other agencies have posted about PFAS. So I'm going to pause there. Do people want to ask any questions about those two slides before I move on?
I don't see anything in the chat. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to.
Okay. I don't have a 20-some slides, so we won't have slides for the whole hour, I promise. The Biden administration recognized this, and it was a real huge push on the environmental justice side, and I can explain more about that later. But the plan, much to the thrill of the environmental community, issued a government-wide plan to combat PFAS pollution in October 2021 that lists over 100 action items at EPA, the Department of Defense, because the PFAS was used in firefighting foams, and every base has firefighting crews and practices and trainings and aircraft. And so there's a lot of what they call AFFF, aqueous film foaming firefighting agents. And so there's a lot of DoD involvement in PFAS because of that. Department of Energy, FDA, and other agencies all have action items in the Biden administration plan. So that was about, 18 months ago, I think. Since that time, EPA proposed a listing of two PFAS as hazardous substances, which triggers a lot of other regulatory authorities that EPA may have to control the substance. So two of them are listed as have been proposed, I'm sorry, as hazardous substances. EPA in March just recently proposed to establish drinking water standards. Now, this is the water that comes out of your tap. And water systems, the purveyors of water, those who sell you your water and you pay a monthly bill, they are going to be required to meet very stringent standards for PFAS if EPA standards are finalized. They're set at a very low level. We're talking about the parts per trillion level for these contaminants because they're found to be harmful to health at very low levels. In fact, EPA is proposing to set these standards at the lowest level that PFAS can be detected using methodologies that are available in the field. So a very low level. DoD was required by Congress to restrict procurement, which has bearing on our topic today. The National Defense Authorization Act required DoD to restrict, really stop, period, the purchase of PFAS containing products for certain product categories and for two of the most widely used and best studied PFAS, known as PFOA and PFOS. I won't go into the names, but that's now in effect at the Department of Defense. And I would like to talk about that a little bit more later on. Finally, the Biden-Harris campaign had an environmental justice plan. And in the environmental justice plan, they specifically made campaign promises. And I've just switched the slides if you're falling asleep there. They made campaign pledges in July of 2020. I have a typo, I see, sorry about that. And they had 4 specific pledges related to PFAS. If you can imagine, in a presidential campaign, calling out one particular chemical or class of chemicals and having 4 pledges in your environmental justice plan. And the first was designating PFAS as hazardous substances. And I put a check mark there because EPA has proposed to do that. The second one is setting limits for PFAS in drinking water, and I put a check mark there because EPA has proposed to do that. Accelerating research, that's happening across several agencies beyond EPA. And so that research is underway, and we've seen some more studies coming out. In fact, the U.S. Geological Survey just released a report in early July showing that there is at least one or more PFAS in nearly 50%. I think the number is 45, but nearly half the drinking water in private wells and public water supplies in the United States. Finally, the last of the 4 pledges was prioritizing substitutes through procurement. And I know there's been some action in the executive order related to PFAS, but in my view, that is one that is still a question mark in terms of whether that will be accomplished and how soon it will be accomplished. And that's the one we're focusing on today, this campaign pledge to prioritize substitutes through procurement. The other actions going on in the Biden administration, I just went over the campaign pledges, but the executive order 14057 issued in December uses this language in addressing sustainable procurement. It's section 208, incentivize markets for sustainable products. You all know about that. The White House fact sheet released on that same day in December spelled out PFAS specifically and mentioned prioritizing sustainable purchases, such as products without added PFAS. That was from the White House. And a White House memorandum issued that day also said to the maximum extent practicable, agencies should avoid the procurement of PFAS containing covered items. That executive order, as you well know, was followed up by a CEQ implementing instructions in August 2022, which pretty much did not expand on these, specific directives, but did provide a little more administrative framework for making, carrying forward some of the executive order requirements. Now, the executive order is really mostly around reducing carbon dioxide and climate greenhouse gases and an energy efficiency. And we understand that that's important. But this was also in the executive order. And, this is the issue that we've really been focusing on here with procurement, is an opportunity to really move the needle in terms of pushing the market towards safer alternatives to this terrible chemical that's nearly ubiquitous now in the environment and indeed in human bodies. I'm going to pause there. Any questions before I go on about what the administration has said, what the commitments are coming from the administration? I welcome GSA to jump in if I've gotten anything wrong. Okay. Leslie's got her hand up.
Sorry, I can never get to all the little emojis quick enough to make it happen in real time. Thanks for all of this. Of course, it's chilling. I'm looking at my plastic drinking bottle right now, thinking, wait a minute, am I poisoning myself during this presentation? I know some folks may be aware, but the recent appropriation bill language on both the House and Senate for the Department of Defense no longer allows climate to be a consideration in purchasing agreements. We haven't talked about it a lot in this group because it's just happened in the past week, but I'm wondering if the PFAS is tied in with this, given the defense angle you mentioned. The language hasn't been conferenced, so there's still some flexibility, but it does look like that climate procurement requirement will be strict. Is that tied into this at all?
I don't think it is, because we had in the NDAA and in the past appropriations for DoD, we've had some good things added for PFAS, restricting incineration of PFAS, restricting the use of PFAS firefighting foam, and studies, and information for veterans, cleanup money. And so I think they've been set aside and are not now. I don't know if they're somehow affected by that language related to climate, but there are cuts to the cleanup program at DoD, and that is seriously a serious concern for us. The House bill would cut cleanup funding for DoD's environmental restoration program by $500 million, which is a lot of money. Even so, even as DoD cleanup responsibilities have gone up by about $8 billion, probably because of PFAS that they're finding. So the cleanup liability has gone up, but Congress is, at least the House committee, is proposing to cut the cleanup funds for the cleanup program. So that's a concern. I don't know about the other language you specifically mentioned about climate change.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll circle back with you after.
Sure.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. As mentioned at the top, there is a new rule, and it was published, I think, maybe today. I haven't seen if it's actually published. I read the pre-publication notice, much of it. I didn't get through all of it, but and again, I welcome any GSA representatives to jump in on this. But it instructs agencies to achieve 95% sustainable procurement while continuing to ensure products meet statutory purchasing requirements and prioritizing multi-attribute products. So one of the, I won't say a hurdle, one of the issues that needs to be reconciled in sustainable procurement are working in concert with statutory requirements that GSA and all government agencies already have, including a requirement to give preference to bio-based products, which are identified by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Energy Star program, which is run principally out of Department of Energy, the significant alternatives for ozone depleting substances that are identified by EPA, and a requirement to use a certain percentage of recovered materials, which is identified by EPA. Those are good things, but they do complicate achieving sustainable procurement. And I'll give you one example. Something could be bio-based. It may have a certain content that USDA determines is bio-based, but that doesn't mean that it's free from toxins such as PFAS. It could very well be that as GSA and this executive order are trying to influence the government to move toward PFAS-free products, that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is recommending products that contain PFAS through the bio-based program. That could be happening. We've raised that issue with USDA, and they say they're concerned, but they don't know that they can really change under the current law, their current practice. But they certainly seem to understand that that is an issue that they too would like to work around, because they don't want the program to be, besmirched by being called out for recommending products that contain PFAS, and having a statutory requirement that agencies give those products preference when they're purchasing. The new rule also describes multi-attribute as meaning one or more statutory item, those listed above, and one or more required item from the EPA Environmentally Preferred Purchasing Program, the EPP. So a multi-attribute means, hitting a couple different targets, complying with a statutory requirement and complying with one of EPA's recommendations, which are a whole, hundreds of additional products that are certified by third-party certifier as sustainable. I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions, or Troy, if you want to expand on that, or just make sure that we're all on the same page before I go on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. You're the expert here. I'm just taking this all in, and I'm so appreciative of how well packaged is for us to explain this to us.
Okay. Oh, Troy, I'm sorry. I thought you were from GSA.
No, I used to be at GSA, but no, I'm the chair of the full committee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So I'm here to educate myself. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. All right, we're going to move along. The new rule, there's a couple of issues with the new rule, and they're, it's the same framework, the same paradigm as before, really, where the government has the burden of identifying these products. For example, EPA has the burden, I guess, of identifying those products that are going to be sustainable, meet a certain standard, and can be certified, thereby giving information to those purchasers that it is a multi-attribute sustainable product. So the burden is on the government, either EPA or someone else in the government. GSA has the burden of providing tools and training and resources to thousands of different procurement officials. And these are, folks across the government whose job is to fill an order for a couch or a chair or whatever it is. And I know from being in the government, I would say we need to, can we get a couch in this room? And that's really all the thought I gave to it. And somebody else had to go out and figure it out. And now that person will have to work their way through the GSA requirements that existed before, plus what has been layered on with this new rule. It requires a judgment of what is the extent practicable by these thousands of officials. And of course, I already kind of talked about how difficult it'll be balancing competing goals for sustainability, for example, bio-preferred versus PFAS-free. And then finally, that's all the sustainability considerations. There are other considerations, cost considerations, Buy American requirements, and a lot of other requirements around procurement that I won't even try to get into because I'm not a procurement expert. But sustainability is only one part of the decision making for this government official. But in that one area of finding sustainable products to advance the president's goal, this is the language that you're going to face in the new rule. And I'll just give you a moment to read it and let you imagine doing this from the seat of a government procurement official. So the point of that, putting that up there was, this is not easy. This is complicated. And this has got to be replicated by thousands of folks, maybe folks that are not necessarily trained that well, not necessarily by folks who think of themselves as sustainability experts in any way. They've been doing procurement for a long time, perhaps, but this is new stuff that they have to weigh and consider when they're doing sustainable procurement. And that's not really all of it. They also have to do this as part of the new rule. So there's some guidance in here about what is practicable, when it is not practicable, meeting the statutory requirements, as well as the EPA sustainability requirements. A very complicated, I call it a thorny thicket that thousands of government officials are going to have to go through if this is going to be successful in eliminating purchases of added PFAS in products purchased by the government. So a few months ago, we had proposed to GSA in a letter to Administrator Carnahan a different sort of paradigm, a new way of thinking about this. Instead of the government trying to go through thousands of products or working with third-party certifiers to figure out what products are sustainable or which ones are PFAS-free, ask the companies to do so. If you want to sell to the government, tell the government whether your product is PFAS-free. And companies could affirm. They could sign a representation that their products are PFAS-free as part of any offer to sell to the government. And we recommend this for the government MAS, the multiple awards schedule, which is also known as just the GS schedule. The GS schedule should include only PFAS-free products in categories for which safer substitutes are available. Now, PFAS-free products aren't available for every kind of product the government might use, but it's not hard to figure out when there are safer alternatives. And the executive order says prioritize safer substitutes. So our question is, why not just put only the safer substitutes? They're substitutes. We know that they exist and they're safer. Why not put only those products on the GSA schedule so that when the poor government official has to buy a couch and they go to the GSA schedule, all the work has been done for them. All those products should meet the tests that are laid out in the rule in terms of sustainability and statutory requirements. Now it gets a little more complicated because we still have to deal with the biopreferred and perhaps some other issues like that where there's conflict. But when the GSA government official, when the government official in some agency, and there are thousands of them, goes to the GSA schedule, they should know that their work has been done for them and they don't have to go through this very complex analysis that I just showed you on the previous pages to figure out which product is the right product for them to purchase to meet the test and to advance the president's objective of sustainable procurement. Finally, we would add that after putting it on the GSA schedule, after making the requirement of the GSA schedule, work through the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and start to incorporate the same affirmation from companies for any government contract. So that when the government is buying these products, they know that they are PFAS free. And the reason, and I just changed the slide, if you're following along at home, the reason why this works, I think, for PFAS, and it might not work as well for other types of sustainability goals, is that added PFAS is a binary concept. It's either in or it's out. It's not like renewable energy where it's got to be, there's a certain percentage and it's very complicated to figure out what that percentage is, or percent recycled material, which is very complicated to figure out. It's very far from straightforward. But added PFAS is very, very simple concept. And companies know, they already market products that are PFAS free. Third-party certifiers have been certifying that products are PFAS free. So it's either in there or it's not in there. So it's very straightforward in that respect. The second reason it's doable is that safer alternatives are available. Companies are marketing PFAS-free products. And you can see a list at the Green Science Policy Institute and a list published by Green Screen that will show you hundreds of products from hundreds of companies that are already marketing as PFAS-free. And if they want to sell to the government and they have to sign a one-sentence affirmation that their product is PFAS-free, it better well be PFAS-free, because no one contracting with the government wants to be caught lying to the government and making a false claim. Already, these third-party certifiers that I've listed here under number 2, they already check the protocols that are involved, and they are certifying that the products that they're listing are in fact PFAS-free, consistent with the marketing claims of these companies. Number 3, it's self-implementing. GSA schedule purchases automatically comply with section 14057 under this proposal for roughly 1/3 of government purchase transactions. So the government official going to the GSA schedule and purchasing off the GSA schedule is adding to the goal of achieving sustainable procurement and PFAS-free procurement automatically, just by simply doing their job and going to the schedule. The percentage of transactions is probably much higher for common products like carpets, chairs, furniture, curtains, water-resistant gear, clothing, foodware, that type of thing. So likely it's more than 1/3 when you consider all the common, everyday, often household-like purchases that the government buys for offices. Finally, it works because it's already being done. The Department of Defense has a procurement rule. They were required to do it under the NDAA. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, but it's working already. It was simple and elegant implementation. And a lot of states are also implementing similar types of actions using state authority. The DoD approach, new slide. For the purchases of nonstick cookware, cooking utensils for use in galleys or dining facilities, and upholstered furniture, carpets, and rugs, those treated with stain-resistant coatings, for those product categories, DoD is requiring that in all solicitations include a representation by whoever's selling the product, the offerer, that, quote, by submission of its offer, the offerer represents that it is not providing as part of its offer any covered items containing PFAS or PFOA. That's simple. Our proposal is that if you want to be on the GSA schedule for products where there are safer alternatives, you sign a statement like that, and you can get a government-wide contract and have your product listed on GSA's multiple award schedule. Any questions before I move off of that? I'm going to back up one. Any questions about what DoD did, what we're proposing to do? Steve, I know you're off screen because you have a very puzzled look. Okay, I'm going to move on. States are doing it. I kind of tried to capture some snippets from what some states are doing. This is happening, probably not quite half of the states have done some kind of restrictions or priority setting to start steering their governments, or even broader in markets in their states, away from PFAS. There's a compilation at the bottom at that link where you can see what all of the states are doing. So it's not a new thing. It's not a crazy novel thing. It's actually something that's gaining a foothold in a lot of the states. And in fact, many states are ahead of the federal government. I would think the Biden administration would be thrilled to be leading this effort. But in fact, a lot of states are ahead of the federal government now in terms of procurement and getting rid of PFAS and products purchased by the government. The American Sustainable Business Network, representing hundreds of thousands of businesses, is supportive of a legislative proposal. I don't think we need a legislative proposal. I think this committee could recommend GSA does this under existing authority, but we went ahead and did a legislative proposal because I think it would accelerate progress. It might cut out some of the rulemaking and administrative work that would have to be done by GSA. But the ASBN is fully behind this. And in fact, Luke, I talked with them today, and you asked if I had suggestions for others that you might want to talk to, and they'd be delighted to speak with you. So the executive director there, David Levine, said, yes, absolutely. They'd be happy to meet with you about this. So they're on board, and they signed the letter to Administrator Carnahan, and they also signed a letter to Chairman Peters in the House Government Affairs Committee in the Senate and the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee and the House Oversight Committee just a couple months ago, supporting this proposal. So here's just a little summary of what we're proposing. And I'll leave that up there for just a second, and then I'm just going to get this off of the screen so that we can just talk and take questions, and really interested in your reactions, frankly. So the main thing is the first bullet there: phase out multiple rewards system contracts for products that contain intentionally added PFAS. Build upon that DoD approach. You could even use the exact same language that DoD uses to block PFAS products from being purchased at the Department of Defense. Incorporate sustainability into the FAR. That's kind of building out the same concept beyond just the MAS, because that's only about 1/3 of purchasing transactions in the government. And the others are just things that you're probably already been focusing on in terms of tracking and reporting on sustainability in the government. But finally, I think it'd be good for the advisory committee to just recommend to GSA that sustainable procurement should be a top goal in the agency. It hasn't been a top goal with reportable milestones in the past. It's not a key performance goal, which is reported to Congress. And I think that really helps get everybody in the agency focused around the top priorities of the administrator in the administration. So I think it'd be good to have that from the standpoint of leadership and sending a signal to the troops that this is important to the heads of the agency. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to click this off. If we have to go back to it, we can. And ready for any conversation, feedback, questions that you may have.
So thank you. That was a terrific presentation. I feel a lot smarter now on the issue than before. Your slides related to a thorny thicket as a procurement professional, trying to understand how I might go through that decision-making and approval process to be able to comply with all of the nuances of it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. And one of the overarching themes of what we've talked about here is trying to make this absolutely simple. Like the more difficult it is to make a sustainable acquisition, the less likely it is to occur, right? And so when you put in front of a procurement professional that kind of thorny thicket of decision tree and certifications and approvals and a compliance matrix, it becomes almost impossible to comply with all of that. So I think to me, there is an appeal to reverting to a vendor affirmation, an affirmative affirmation as to what's contained in their product. I do have, I guess, some kind of concerns about that approach in general, only in that, I guess, it takes it. I have seen a lot of procurements include a lot of affirmations, right? Like there are some that relate to integrity, they're lobbying, prevailing wage. I mean, we could have 30 affirmations in a procurement by the end of the day. And, I feel like sometimes we overwhelm the vendors and they just sign it. They just affirm whatever we put in front of them because they want to do business with us, right? And they're just like, if I get the contract, I'll worry about it then. And so there may be a distinction in what I'm saying when it comes to a manufacturer who may not take that kind of affirmation as lightly versus a third-party distributor who maybe has 100 products from 100 different vendors and it doesn't really know that level of detail about what is contained in a product and is really just trying to get a schedule and get on a schedule. And maybe that's a little skeptical, but I've seen some crazy things in my time here. So
yeah, Luke, can I address that a little bit?
Sure.
I think that's quite possible. But I also think that once the system is in place and that affirmation is made, then you can always start going back and you can be somewhat flexible with enforcement at first, but once the system is in place, then you kind of move into an implementation and oversight, and you may have to push back on some vendors and say, is this really true? You sure you want to say it? I mean, that can happen over time, but I think having it in place is where you got to start. And some may be bad at. I mean, you can have a policy of you get a warning or something before you kick them out. But to me, that gets into sort of an implementation stage once you have a framework in place.
Yep, we've got a bunch of questions now, so we'll start with Leslie. You had your hand up first. Go for it, Leslie.
Thanks. Thank you for this very interesting presentation. Are there parallel efforts being conducted at the state and local level to deal with procurement there? And I'm thinking in particular schools, where just reading your background information here, it says it's especially I don't know what the right word is, deadly for children. So I would think schools would want to keep that procurement out of there.
We're a lot of there. If you go to that one link that I put in there at the bottom, that was, I think, from Safer States. They also include cities and as well as states that have ordinances or local laws. And so you can look at those. I don't know of any that are specific to schools. We are concerned about schools as well. It's really hard from the federal level because the federal government's not in schools. States could be in schools, but they're really controlled by school districts. And honestly, we don't have a good handle on whether schools are avoiding these kinds of carpets and rugs and other things that are, common in a school building. That's not very satisfying, but in terms of the laws that are out there, that compilation is pretty good that I put a link to. I'll have to send that. I guess you can't look at it now, but I'll send it right.
We'll distribute it. And you know what, as you're asking questions, you can introduce yourselves too. I don't think we did an introduction. Leslie, go for it.
I apologize. I'm Leslie Cordes. I'm Vice President of Programs at Series.
Great. David, you're up next. Go for it.
Thank you. Enjoyed your presentation, John. Okay, my name is David Wager. I'm Chief Scientist and Director of Environmental Management at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. I actually follow PFAS fairly closely. I noticed, or I'd be interested in your view about what intentionally added means. I could imagine for something like a carpet or a fabric, a tent fabric, that it would be what you add to the fabric to make it water repellent and other things. But then there's complex products like vehicles or computers where a plastic component might have a release agent, which is PFAS, but it's not really intended to be part of that component, but it may not be completely free of it. And it may be that it's not required to be reported up the supply chain or down the supply chain because it's below threshold. So I think there's kind of an informational gap, is that I'm not sure they're able to even figure it out if their supply chains are really quite complex. Which I'm not saying that what you suggest isn't a good idea. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily in or out. It's, well, we don't think it's in, but it might be in. And I agree that you have to start off slowly and build confidence and build the system up. So that's kind of one thought I had. I guess the other one is, does it matter what the definition of PFAS is? Because I know that nobody really agrees with what it is. And then the other question is, and I wish Jenny Romer were here from EPA, but I know that they might look at it from what's the worst molecule or the types of molecules, and should we prioritize the worst ones first versus others that may be more benign? And maybe that's just too deep of a question right now, but just thinking about it that way as well.
No, absolutely. Those are very insightful questions, David. In proposed legislation, we went through this, what is intentionally added. And in a nutshell, it comes down to, was it added to contribute to the performance of the product? And what we were trying to get at there was that there's so much PFAS in the environment. You probably can't buy almost anything without some detection.
It's raining PFAS, and it's raining at levels that are above those thresholds that you mentioned and some of you didn't mention.
And it could be in the water that's used in a manufacturing process, and you didn't put it there intentionally, but it ends up in the product. So we worked very hard with a lot of groups, and Luke, I'll send to you the proposed legislation too, because there's a very precise definition there that we worked through with a lot of stakeholders on what does intentionally added mean. The second part of that first question is, well, what if it's in some internal part to something like a medical device or something like that? And that's a harder question. And the only way I could answer that is that we're trying to go after products for which there are safer alternatives that are known. And there might be some products where every certain kind of let's say heart monitoring device has to have PFAS or does have PFAS, and there aren't going to be alternatives. So in that case, there wouldn't be you wouldn't try to knock that kind of product off of the GSA schedule. But also that kind of product's not on the GSA schedule. The GSA schedule is not, doesn't have weapon systems and medical equipment like that on it. But so the way we would go about that is, if there are alternatives and companies are marketing these as alternatives that do not contain PFAS, then that there's an alternative. In some cases, there just may not be such products. So, but there is a more complicated part of what you're asking about, what we call essential uses. There may be some, especially in weapons and medical technology areas, where people will argue this is an essential use, it saves lives and it's critical. So we're not trying to go after that stuff either on the multiple award schedule. Does that make sense? As for the definition of PFAS, the proposed legislation has the same definition, and it's as broad as you can imagine for PFAS. And the reason is that we're really concerned about, in the regulatory context, this regrettable substitution, they call it. There's so many out there that it's whack-a-mole. And EPA's statutes kind of require EPA to go, one by one through each chemical and determine whether it's safe or not. And at the rate, it's just impossible. When you're talking about thousands of these PFAS, we're going to have to start dealing with categories, or we'll never get through them. The science seems to bear out that the health effects are probably similar across certain categories of PFAS, so that perhaps EPA can tackle them as categories of related PFAS, because otherwise they'll never get a hold of, they'll never be able to regulate them one by one. I hope
Richard,
David, I hope
thank
that
you.
helps, but I'm happy to follow up with you too.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Richard, go for it.
John, appreciate your presentation. I'm Rich Butel. I'm a government contracts lawyer by training, and 10 years in the House and the Senate in an oversight capacity. So your scheme does leverage a fairly common approach, which is self-attestation, self-certification by industry. But from a strictly oversight perspective, self-certification has had a inconsistent implementation and is often abused. So how would you ensure proper oversight? For example, would you have DCMA for DoD contracts? That's the Defense Contract Management Agency. Train up to do the necessary audits? Or would this reside in the Inspector General community? So you'd coordinate with SIGI, which is the Council of Inspectors General, to implement proper oversight capacity. But without proper oversight of this, many private sector companies we have seen will cheat, and even under threat of 10 U.S.C. 10,001 false claims liability, you're still going to have a pretty significant number of cheaters.
So, you know too much for me to be able to add to your knowledge, Richard. But I imagine there are systems to look at things like Buy American and other audits and reviews of procurement practices within agencies and the competitive bid process. So I guess my thought is this could be folded in too. And I guess if I were the one designing it, I do have some experience at EPA, I would do it on sort of a spot check. You don't have to review every single contract. I think the community marketing to the government needs to know, like the IRS, there could be an audit. You don't need too many, really, as long as they know that it's happening and that certain contracts could be reviewed, randomly sampled and reviewed. I think it would go a long way toward compliance.
But just quick follow-up, are you confident that the specific and necessary expertise in terms of workforce is resident in government to do meaningful audits? Question?
Am I confident of that?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm in a good place to answer that. I think the expertise is there in the government. I don't know that it's in the GSA auditing function, but it wouldn't be that hard. It would not be that hard if a company is making the affirmation to see whether they have any other certification from third parties. If they do, I think your work is done. If they don't, it gets really complicated because they could, in theory, be PFAS free and not be advertising it and have not sought a certification. So it could be two-tiered. Like, could be a very easy check just to see if it's certified by a third party or by EPA. If it's not, it could get more complex.
David, go for it.
If I could jump in, I just want to follow up on that point. A thought occurs to me, and I won't name names or things, but let's say that there's an undesirable attribute of a product, and there's this other product that never had that undesirable attribute. And then it goes and claims, it says, our product doesn't have that undesirable attribute. It never did. So would we be asking companies to make an affirmation of something that was never true in the first? They didn't have to say they're PFAS free because they never had PFAS in it. I mean, are we making companies do things, or maybe even be misleading because their product never had it added, it didn't have it in it, even, never mind for contaminated water supply or anything. But does that create a problem?
Is that a question for me, David?
Well, it's actually for you or GSA. I don't know, but I'm just wondering,
So
does this apply to everybody no matter what product they're offering? Because it sounds like in many cases it might be unnecessary.
Yeah, in other words, there are going to be products, thousands of products for which PFAS is not normally in use. Is that your question?
Yes, and then I guess the thing is, I guess they could sign the affirmation or make the statement, but it's kind of meaningless in the sense that it was never really applicable to the product in the first place. I'm just wondering from a government point of view whether that's a problem, because I honestly don't know.
Yeah. So the only thing I would say about that is I understand your point, and it's probably true that a lot of products would never have had intentionally added PFAS in the first place. But it's really hard to know where it might be. I mean, it's true. It's surprising. It's very surprising. And if you look at the Green Screen or even our website or the Green Science Policy Institute website, you'll be amazed at how many companies are out there marketing around PFAS and then how many products are listed. It's just kind of mind-boggling how ubiquitous it is in consumer products. So I don't know how to do what you're saying. I can see an implementation that GSA just decides up front. There are some product categories where it's kind of stupid to make an affirmation because these are not ever PFAS containing like products and not require it. That makes sense to me. But I wouldn't make it too small of a circle because there are quite a few products where you might be surprised that it's often used. But I think that comes in it seems to me to be a reasonable thing to consider, David, for implementation ultimately. I'm trying to think of a product where it wouldn't make sense, but I'm sure there are some. Stephanie,
You've got your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, I just have a very quick question. I'm Stephanie Hardison. I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Officer. Just wondering if there has been any sort of contaminant levels or standards set. Since it's everywhere in everything, has there been any sort of measure like, what is the maximum level? What is the minimum level? That type of standard set,
Yeah.
because you wouldn't want folks to be caught at cheating who may not necessarily have been trying to cheat. Just wondering if something like that has been established or is in place.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the science is still coming along on that, Stephanie. EPA is just now proposing it like a certain concentration in water. But when you think about it, that's going to be like the easiest you can do among all the things that you might need a standard for, because how much is too much on a carpet or how much is too much in a food container and how much of that rubs off and gets ingested into your body. And so, those questions are so hard to answer. And it's so far out there already, this set of chemicals that, it doesn't seem practicable that we'll ever get answers to those questions before, it's been before millions and millions of additional people are exposed sort of needlessly, because a lot of these products you certainly can find alternatives. So the answer to your question is there aren't. To understand a percentage or what's allowable on solid products or textiles or anything that's not water right now, we're a long way from having a standard like that.
Can I just add a follow-up question? And I ask because in a past profession, I used to be a procurement professional. And so are there predominant areas that may have more contaminant than other areas, states or counties? Well, and so I think, well, now are we not procuring? Are we not buying from those areas? Are we not, have those types of things been considered when addressing this issue?
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
Some areas people have more exposure because it's in the water. Now, if the USGS study that was done earlier in the month of July, it's actually August now, last month in July, showed that in some parts of the country, there's more in the water and also likely more in the fish and wildlife and likely more in people's blood, simply because they're in areas where the manufacturing of PFAS has taken place. So there might be more in air emissions and water. I don't think that you can connect that directly to products. The products flow all around the economy. They could be, the PFAS could be made in, New Jersey and shipped to some other factory and put into a kid's toy in some other state. And so it'd be really hard to geographically tackle the sourcing side of it, I think. Does that answer your question, Stephanie?
It does. Thank you.
Dr. White. You're on mute.
Yeah, it would help if I take myself off mute. Thanks again, Luke, and thanks, John, for raising this with the group and for all the great questions that I heard so far. And I wanted to maybe come back to something I heard from Stephanie and then maybe David is, that it is about a little bit about the de minimis levels, right? And then what the definition of a PFAS is, because there are so many, right? And so there has to be a way to identify which PFAS you're talking about, whether or not there's alternatives that exist, and then whether or not there's actually a de minimis level overall that you could identify and set, right? Because I don't think you want to have GSA get in a position where they make a recommendation to limit all PFAS, but there's no alternatives, or that it's not clear what intentionally added kind of means in the context for GSA overall, right? And so, and then, you know, for the de minimis levels, even the ones that are set like for water and other topics, they're very specific to certain PFAS. So not necessarily kind of the full suite of class of PFAS, because it's, you know, because the science is very clear on certain PFAS, but not on others, right? And so, you know, trying to understand categorization, I think, is really important when you're looking at how you might incorporate that into a procurement process. And then maybe coming back to something that Luke said and someone else on the line about the attestations, right, is that I think that is a little bit of a potential tricky road, because you could get people attesting that they don't have, you know, PFAS in their products and they don't really know, or they didn't intentionally add them, and then someone might test them later and find it because it was there for some other purpose, that it was in, like you said, the water that was used to create the product in some way. And so how do you deal with that from a compliance perspective? And so I think there's a lot of things that have to kind of go into how do you actually categorize this in a way that would actually be meaningful for GSA moving forward, you know, overall. And sorry, I guess I didn't say who I was. I'm Kimberly Wise-White with the American Chemistry Council. I lead our regulatory and scientific affairs division. I'm also a toxicologist by background. So
those are excellent points, Kimberly. You know, on the de minimis, I think it's very important to distinguish between affirming that you do not have any PFAS in your product and affirming that you do not have any intentionally added PFAS. So if it's de minimis and it wasn't put into the product as part of the performance of to enhance the performance of the product, and you can look at the definition when I send it along later, you can't be held responsible for PFAS. It's just, you know, tagging along like what do they call them when you pick up ants on your shoes and bring them into the house? You know, there's going to be PFAS like that, like the ants that get on your shoes and follow you into the house. We're not trying to go after that PFAS. We're trying to get after the intentional use and intentionally added. And I'll send along the definition that we came up with, and you can react to it. But also the second, another point you made, which was a good one, was related to attestation. I would only say that it cannot be any weaker as a policy than asking a government official to figure out whether there's intentionally added PFAS. In other words, I think it would advance the ball. It wouldn't be perfect, but I think it would take us a long way, because a lot of companies do know, and they're already making these claims about being PFAS free.
thanks, John.
I do not see any more. David, did you have something else?
I was going to say is that kind of brings us back to Richard's point about, you know, self-certification versus third-party verification of a claim. It would seem to me that this might be the odd attribute out, to the extent that the other ones, say recycled content and maybe, you know, climate impact, would have to be verified by a third party just to make sure it's true and it's not, true is good enough. Versus something that would be self-certified. I don't know if that would be a problem. And I think another thing I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on is, you talked about sort of how do you pick a product with the most attributes that are desirable? And then the question is, well, how do you weight them? Is one kind of a veto over the other one? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's good luck. That's hard. I mean, that's the thorny thicket question, isn't it? And I think getting the framework in place is a good place to start, but I don't think that's the end. I think that GSA, if I had to do this, I think I would start with in some ways, PFAS is easy because of the binary concept, it's in or out, and at least get those products off the schedule. But then you might want to try to find a way to list only products that are multi-attribute, that already meet that definition in that regulation, and list only those products on the schedule. And that's a bigger question. And I would say that's for tomorrow, because I don't have the answer. But it makes a lot of sense that you would not suggest to all these procurement officials that you can buy anything on the schedule, but then you have to go through this complex analysis to figure out which ones are multi-attribute. I mean, that seems impossible to me, when the work could be done centrally, just, you know, by the contracts that are actually available to them to purchase from.
Yeah, and if I could add to that too, John and David, that multi-attribute is a difficult road just from a framework perspective, right? Because if we think about, okay, you're adding sustainability attributes and you have, let's say, 30 sustainability attributes that are in the procurement system, like how do you pick which one is better? Or if you have one that has 3 of the sustainability attributes, which one that has 1, but that one is a significant one that drives forward what the administration is looking to move forward on, climate reductions or something like that, is that a more favorable attribute to have? So I think it gets really difficult to figure out, like, when you're trying to add all those attributes together in some way that would be meaningful for the person making the decision.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. One thing I just kind of wanted to harken back to, and Kimberly, you made me think of it, was there are a lot of tough issues here. But I know that this committee and the overall committee, we're also looking to identify low-hanging fruit. And I kind of think this might be one. I mean, you might have to couch your recommendation as, they should look into what would be the practicality of doing this kind of approach, or what would be the obstacles. Maybe it's too bold to just say you ought to do this. I don't know what position that puts GSA in. But I would put it in the category of, this is one that might be quite doable, and it might be worth GSA seriously considering how this might be done, because it would be a big win that might be quite doable, and it doesn't slow you down on getting to multi-attribute. In fact, it advances you, but it just doesn't solve the whole problem. So why not do it? And why not take a win off the table as you consider other recommendations to get to that multi-attribute concept?
Maybe a question for Stephanie. I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but historically, have we seen GSA advance recommendations or procurement in the past related to a singular or set of chemistries?
I could not answer that, Dr. White. I honestly couldn't answer that.
So some sort of recommendation related to PFAS is something that this subcommittee is contemplating at this point in time. And as such, I did want to give the folks who had not commented or asked any questions yet an opportunity to ask or offer something if they wanted. Mark, I'm not sure, I think you might have had to step away. If you have any questions or thoughts before we wrap up with John, or Anish, you as well, if you have any thoughts or questions.
I didn't have any questions. Thanks for the discussion and the presentation, John. It was very helpful.
You're welcome.
Great. Troy or Cassius, any final thoughts for our guest?
Yeah, just thanks. Very much enjoyed the presentation and learned a lot from it. I would just like, I put in the chat a link to a bill that was considered last week in the Senate Homeland Security Governmental Affairs Committee. John, based on the description of the legislation you were talking about, it seems like this is something different. But it, first of all, initially requires agencies by October 1, 2025 to buy PFAS-free cookware, utensils, carpets, and furniture. And then beyond that, directs agency heads to prioritize purchase of products that don't contain PFAS. I understand there were some changes made to the bill when it went through committee. So I'm trying to track that down, and we'll circulate it to the subcommittee when I get my hands on that.
Okay, great. If there is nothing else, we'll let John retire to the audience or another meeting or wherever else you may want to be. John, final parting thoughts?
Well, just thank you. And the only parting thought is that PFAS was called out as sort of a special issue, both in the campaign and in the executive order and the memo and the implementation guidance. So I guess I really welcomed hearing you say, Luke, that you might have a specific recommendation. And I don't think that will be viewed as unusual or weird in any way, since it's already been called out as an issue by the administration and made a priority. So I hope you'll give this some thought, and I'm very happy to follow up with you and look at stuff or consult again. And I promise to follow up with our letter to, I guess I sent you the letter to the administrator. I don't know if I sent to you the letter to Congress, but that contains the definition of PFAS and some other things we talked about. So I'll send that along for you too, and you can put that into your committee's
Sure.
background files.
Yep, that would be great. That would be
Thank
great.
you.
We're compiling information at this point.
I'll take my camera off. Thank you so much.
Great.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Jim. So, to revert back to regular business here, I know we've got a kind of a rotating group of folks, and some people have missed some meetings here or there, but to revisit the approach that we've adopted over the last meeting or two, what we've done is we've split into some task groups. There's a PFAS task group and there's a tech tools task group. And the model we've adopted is that those groups are going to meet between these larger 1 month public meetings and try to identify and pool information, speakers, try to come up with, try to move the ball essentially between these big public meetings. And then at the meetings like today, come to the larger group, present what they have done, and try to get feedback from the larger group on a monthly basis. So we have really only begun in earnest over the last, I'd say, two or 3 weeks. So there is not a whole lot to report as of today. And even though we have the tech tools task group listed for a report out of discussion, there are no members of the tech tools task group at our meeting currently. So there will not be a meaningful report out from the tech tools task group at this point. There has been an abundance of activity, and I think there was some great conversations at the acquisition workforce committee meeting on Tuesday of this week. And I would love to have had that debrief here with you folks today. I'm not sure if anyone else at this meeting was at that meeting and might want to try to take a stab at articulating that. I know it's not fair to put you on the spot like this, but if there was anybody who wants to talk about it, I'll give you the opportunity now. Okay, no takers. So the membership in these groups is not closed. So if anybody wants to join the PFAS or Tech Tools Task Group, reach out in between, and we'll rope you into the meetings, and we'll catch you up in whatever's appropriate and as quick as possible. We do have some members of the PFAS Task Group, and so again, work has just begun to begin. But we have had a meeting and a discussion and some initial thoughts, and I'm not sure if Richard maybe or David wanted to take a stab at just kind of articulating what we were thinking so far.
Well, I have started and put on the share drive a lit review document that significantly overlaps with what was just presented. In fact, he did a really good job in that slide deck of covering all the various initiatives on PFAS. And so I duplicated a lot of that material and put it on the share drive. So I've just been rooting around in the literature to see what's going on from a regulatory or a legislative perspective, and just doing an inventory, kind of listing those things out. So spent some time on that the last week.
Thanks, Richard. Leslie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and I apologize, Luke. I've been on travel and out for some work conferences, so I have not been at the last couple meetings. Is there a kind of TOR for the two subcommittees that I could refer to handy, or is that in the shared drive?
TOR is not a term I am familiar with, so somebody's going to have to
Sorry,
figure
I
it out.
apologize. Terms of reference, just something that describes the role of both subcommittees.
I think if you want, we can discuss, we can talk afterwards, and I can kind of
The
catch you up.
PFAS one is fairly self-evident to me now that I've just joined this call, but the tools one I'm not familiar with. So
Yes, it is. It's infinitely more broad ranging and complicated, and probably requires a discussion with somebody from that group. Some passionate voices in the tech tools group, but yeah, we can orchestrate that. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Richard said. I put in a couple of documents too. I know that the ITRC is renewing their PFAS guidance document, and I think it's the Interstate Technology Research Council or something like that, that look at a variety of topics, including PFAS. I also put in the reverse chronology of what the unified agenda is for regulations that involve PFAS. It only comes up with EPA, which doesn't get at things we might be interested in, such as what does the supply chain look like, which I think is a little bit opaque right now. And Richard, I saw your document. We can sort of noodle it a bit and put some other things in there. Just wanted to add that is at least a little bit that I've done on the topic.
Okay, great. And I think what I'm taking a leap here, but I think our next step is probably a check-in with the larger group, and to kind of have a discussion about the material, see what we've come up with, and potentially identify, I guess. I think we had identified safer cities as a potential target for an invitation to talk to us. I'm not sure if anybody's reached out to them yet.
Are we going to get his deck and put it on the share drive? Because it's a really good deck.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So Safer Cities, does anybody know if we've contacted Safer Cities? Okay. That was an organization, I think, that had a wealth of information on state policies. So I think it was also mentioned in the deck here. So we'll take another look at that. Okay, so I think for next steps, we're trying to continue. We're basically in digest material mode at this point, but probably looking to have at least another meeting in the next week or two with that group, hopefully vacations permitting. Stephanie, were you going to offer something?
Yes, I just wanted to add that Adina did provide some information and outline potential topics also for the PFAS task force as well. She's been unavailable this week so that we can discuss, but as soon as I'm able to get with her, we'll definitely talk about that and then add it to the folder, and then see if she can join the task force in a discussion.
Okay, great. That's good. Yes, Adina plus potentially Safer Cities. I think those are plus material digestion. All good initial steps here, I think. Okay, thank you both. As I mentioned, no tech tools group. So when it comes to administrative business here, what I had been thinking is that we might have an ability for Steve to kick off a discussion about the proposed rule that was just, I guess, publicly launched today, because I know he has strong feelings about it. And I think and I'll defer to Troy and Cassius, but I think we may be in a position to comment on it, or formally, maybe not just this subcommittee, but the broader committee. So I'm not sure if any decisions have been made on that or any approach has been determined, but I'm sure it'll be a topic of conversation, at least in this subcommittee. So is there any direction you want to share with us, or any thoughts you guys have had at this point so far?
Yeah, no, nothing to add at this time, just to agree that obviously a topic of interest to the subcommittee, and I very much would like to have a discussion when Steve's here to elaborate more on some of his views on that. And I'm sure If I'm sure a lot of folks also are kind of in the same boat I am, of not really having had time to digest it fully yet. Cassius, anything else to add?
No, I was just going to add that it was very informative today, and I certainly look forward to this adding value to our overall presentation coming up soon. So thank you for the remarks today.
With respect to the proposed rule, it looks like I think comments are due in 60 days, right? In the beginning of October. Does it make sense for us to have an administrative meeting, maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, to at least kickstart the discussion on that? Maybe we can figure that out later. Yep.
I mentioned the rule at a call at our meeting yesterday for industry partnerships, and I got the sense that as a group we weren't supposed to comment on it. But did I misunderstand that? Or is it just talking about what it means for us? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask David too. I wasn't clear on whether or not we as a committee could make recommendations or whether or not we as individuals could make. I think we as individuals obviously can make comments on it, but I wasn't sure whether or not we as a committee or the subcommittees could make a collective comment on it or not. Maybe we can get clarification from that from GSA.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to get that from legal.
Great. Okay, that makes perfect sense then. So that's the clear next step on that. And depending on that, we can figure out if we want to have a kickoff conversation to start the discussion. Okay, so I'm not sure. I don't have any other administrative business. I do want to open it up if anybody has anything they want to bring to the table here. Discussions, ideas for additional task groups, thoughts.
No ideas, just a question, I guess, for the group. When you send out the follow-up note, or maybe in the chat, if somebody could just drop the link to where all of our information is for the PFAS and anything that we might have for the tech tools work group now, that way folks can take a look. And then I guess since there are folks that are not on the call, I think Luke, in the note that you sent out in advance of this call, you asked for anybody to kind of send in whether or not they were interested. I'm interested in PFAS just because obviously I've heard what was on today. I may be interested in tech tools. I'm just not sure what the band is of the group. And so once I see kind of what they're going to be focusing on, I probably would be interested in that one too.
Great. Well, I can tell you it's still in a position to be shaped by your input and your thoughts. So, I mean, the tech conversation there's a lot to be said. Leslie, go for it.
So I completely apologize if you talked about this at the start of the meeting because I wasn't yet on the call, but I do think that the kind of two significant federal procurement things that came down the pike this week are worth this committee's consideration. I'm not the best person to give detailed information on, but there's, as I mentioned, the language in the conference, the two committees that are conferencing on the defense appropriations bill, specifically banning consideration of climate in procurement, and that has so many implications from renewables to efficiency, et cetera, and given the size and breadth of the department and their various services purchasing power, I think it's potentially pretty large. And then maybe people have seen the CEQ press release that went out to maximize purchases of sustainable products and services as part of the Invest in America agenda. I'm happy to put it in the chat if people haven't seen it, but both of those seem interesting, and there's invitation to comment on those. I don't know.
Those are great points. Thank you for sharing.
My preaching to the choir is this all stuff people know about.
News to me. I'm not sure if anybody else has a response or thoughts they want to share, or how either of those 2 points might impact this committee.
But Leslie, if you could please add that that into the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's see. Here's the press release EPA released today announcing the product and service categories from which we will be assessing standards and eco labels for possible inclusion, blah, blah, blah. I'm cutting and pasting something somebody sent me, so apologies if it's a little bit.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then on the Defense Department, I'll pull up that and put that in the chat as well, if you give me a minute.
Appreciate it, Leslie. Anyone want to respond to Leslie or any other administrative business issues, newsworthy items we should put in front of this committee today? Hottest month in the history of mankind in July. How about that? Talk about the urgency of the work we're doing here. All right. It's
so
important
that the Congress is going the opposite direction in terms of prohibiting people from considering climate.
harsh. Yeah.
Oh, okay, Luke, if you don't have anything at this moment, we can move on and we can open it up to ask for public comments at this time. If there's anyone from the who's online right now who would like to make comments, suggestions, recommendations relevant to this conversation, we're happy to hear from you. All right, Luke, you move forward.
All right, great. Thank you all for your attendance today. We really appreciate it. We know the summer is a tough time to set aside a couple of hours for us. But you know, I said it before and I'll say it again, the work we do here is important. It's going to have an impact. It can have an impact. And we've got to plow through ahead, even through a hot summer, to try to reach some sort of conclusions that the GSA can take and digest and use, hopefully, to achieve the goals of this larger committee. Really appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you folks again. I'm going to speak to Dr. White and Leslie about the tech tools, perhaps invite them to the next meeting so that they can hear from the folks who are working on themselves, the direction it's headed, and decide whether or not they want to participate or to what extent they want to participate. But I think they would love to have 2 additional voices, and it would be great to see you folks there. So we'll make that connection and we'll make that happen. Any other final thoughts from anybody? All right, sounds good. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
Next meeting is August 31st, 3 to 5.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good.
you.